This is what we're talking about tonight. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you're about to know. Because we've got the man with us, Steve Beam, founder, master distiller at Limestone Branch. And he's going to talk with us about this experimental collection. We've got 3 different 100% malted ryes. And we're also going to talk about the Yellowstone Family Recipe. This is our lineup tonight. And got 17-month rye that's a total wine pick. We have a 24-month rye that's a Westport whiskey and wine pick, a 45-month rye that is a distillery pick, and then the Yellowstone Family Recipe that came out last year. So before we get into all of this, wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. First of all, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends. A couple of us are here tonight. Alan Bishop, he's got Distiller's Talk with Christy Atkinson. He's got One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. He's got If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. I don't know. It's Wednesday, June 28th. Alan, are there any new shows that you're here to report?
Yeah, so this weekend, the show with Jerry Dalton of Jim Beam will be going up to celebrate Jerry's induction into the Bourbon Hall of Fame, Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. And that would not have happened if it weren't for you, Kevin, and greatly appreciated. And
oh, yeah. Cool.
Probably by far my favorite episode of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything so far. So Jerry's an absolute pleasure. And make sure you listen to the very end of it, because there is a piece of music that his mother played piano on. That's pretty special. And there will be a little bonus episode coming next week, too, about the time that Crawdads almost sank Jim Beam, Boston.
Oh, yes. Then we also have our show, my show, Bourbon Turntable. We had a show drop this morning with a band by the name of Mojo Thunder. We talked with them, had a really good time with them, tasted some whiskey. If you don't know this band, they're fantastic. So tune into the show. Apart from shows where we have Alan, I think we probably laugh more on this show than we had on any other that I can remember. So check that out. And a couple other things. We do these bar cart shows, Alan and I do, about once a quarter. First one we did was Tale of Two Stills, where we had Adam Stumpf and Todd Leopold on to talk about the stills that they've got at their distillery. We did a show with about non-traditional grains. We did a show where we did a blind tasting on wheat whiskeys. We did a show where we took Borrowed Page. And if you don't know the story of Borrowed Page and what they're doing, they're now on volume 2 of that.
Yeah, I gotta get a bottle of that.
Yeah, me too. I kind of thought we need to get them back on the show to do the same kind of thing.
I'll reach out to him. I'm not above asking for free bottles.
But it was a blend from Watershed Distillery, Wiggle Whiskey, Whiskey Del Bach, and Spirits of French Lick, and the folks over at American Mash and Grain blended that, and it turned out fantastic. We had each of the distillers on there, and it was a great conversation. And then our first show for 2023 was a show we called Inside American Single Malt, where we had some outstanding distillers in American Single Malt, and got to talk with them about what they're doing, what the future is for American Single Malt. And that was a lot of fun. But instead of having to wait months for another bar cart show, we actually have one coming up on July 6th with Chris Koenig. Mm-hmm. Chris has his Chico Creek straight rye whiskey, which they had previously been sourcing it. This is the first batch of that rye that they've distilled at Golden Beaver. Mm-hmm. And then we'll also be sampling their Pacific Flyway straight whiskey, which is the first batch of straight whiskey that they've distilled at Golden Beaver. And Alan and I will be joined by Pat and Mike from My Whiskey Den, so that'll be a lot of fun. Alan has already mentioned the great news about Jerry Dalton. anybody that reached out to KDA on Jerry's behalf, I know he appreciates that. So thank you for doing it. And last but certainly not least, happy Mark Biertaler's birthday, who's the head distiller at Whiskey Del Bach. So, Mark, hopefully you're doing something better than listening to us tonight. But if you happen to be listening now or listening later, we wish you a very happy birthday. So, all that aside, some really fun stuff, but the fun is just about to start. Steve Beam, welcome to Bar Cart Co-op, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. And, that was such an impressive list of shows that you had. I'm honored to be included in that company.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly incredibly worthy. And, as I mentioned at the top, this has a little bit of a cult following.
Yes, we should preface the entire show with, it's really bad. Don't try to find it. You don't need to collect it at all. This is for people like me that don't like good whiskey.
But we're gonna talk with Steve about this whole experimental collection. I mean, the experimental collection is more than just the 100% malted rye. You've done a lot of several different things with it.
Right.
The one that we've just kind of latched on to as our favorite and as our pet is the 100% malted rye. So yeah, it really got me keenly interested in malted ryes. And so anytime I would find something that was 100% malted rye or had a high malted rye content, I would get it and I would try it, and you're to blame.
Yeah. And not, I will secondarily say on my end, none of the other ones have been as good as the one that you put out. They're good, but they're not. You got some magic going on over there with that, buddy. So
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. It's one of those things that you just can't hardly reproduce. It's just kind of unique to the distillery, with the stills and the microflora and the climate. And we were I was talking with Kevin before the show about the storage container and quarter cask that we used.
Yep.
That opened on both ends, had great airflow, and was open 350 days a year at ambient temperatures. It's just an interesting mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You guys were the first place that I saw using the quarter cask like that and then setting up the shipping containers. I remember when I came down there that day and you showed me that. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I mean, I still think that's an awesome idea. And it was a great program, and the whiskeys that were coming out of that, and they're all fantastic. So,
that is something that people say too, because, you hear, oh, you can't make whiskey in a quarter cask, or you can't. And, I've had some really bad whiskey out of quarter casks.
Yeah, right.
But this, that setup, with the stills and that setup in the container and where we are, it just worked. And it really did produce some nice whiskey.
Well, and I've known you longer than I've known anyone in the legal industry, pretty much, obviously. And I've credited you many times with helping me get my start in the legal industry. But, you've always had an eye towards quality in particular. And, that your cask selection for that program had a lot to do with that as well, as far as, making sure you're using quality wood and you're paying attention to what you're doing with your maturation program, as opposed to just slapping something into a quarter cask that comes from wherever,
Right.
in general.
Yeah, it came from a great cooperage and McGinnis cooperage in Cuba, Missouri, and they make a really nice quality product, and wasn't new. A lot of times you get that new wood out of the cask that you just can't get rid of, that I hate.
I describe it as like metallic black olives. Like when you open a can of black olives for a pizza, it's got that same. I can't. Yeah. No, don't want anything to do with it.
And I was gonna say, I'm allergic to like new oak.
Right.
Which as a distiller is terrible. But on some of these things, that I'll taste, if it has new oak like that in it, I just start to close up here, and goes just right up there. It's instantaneous.
Wow.
I got to throw in too, and I don't know how many people have heard you say that to New Oak before, but I've had that conversation with you, and in my mind, you being a Beam and Dant descendant, like God has to have a sense of humor. Like there's just there's no way around it. Just yep, we're picking a Beam Dant, and here's some wood allergy.
But well aged doesn't bother me. But boy, cool. And maybe that's a Beam thing. It's like you're not going to age it, you're going to pay.
Not that you're allergic to it. Not that you're allergic to oak. It's that you're allergic to young whiskey.
Right.
That's what it is.
Well, speaking of young whiskey, let's, if you've not already, let's pour a sample of this 17-month. It is 94 proof, number 3 char on the barrel. And as Steve's already said, it's a quarter cask. It went in the barrel at 109.6. And so while we're tasting a little sip of that, oh my gosh.
I know. That's the problem. It's
okay.
Drew was here earlier, and he mentioned something I didn't think about with this. So we've talked, and we'll talk about our tasting notes in a minute too. But I always think of peach whenever I have this in particular, right? The kind of area in between the flesh and the skin. But Drew told me, he goes, it takes me back to eating like the peach candy rings is what he thinks of when he has it. So he has a sort of a apothecary candy sort of flashback happen with it.
Yeah. So before my knees buckled when I took this to my nose. Golly, that's fantastic. In case, somebody's, just arrived from another planet, Steve, tell them a little bit about your story, because it's a real story about bourbon legacy. It's not, my great grandpappy had his pot still on the Mayflower and brought it over on his shoulders. And, it's none of that garbage. I mean, it's legit.
Packed it full of heirloom corn seeds and brought it over.
So share us with that story.
Yeah. So, when people hear the name Beam, obviously they think of my cousins who have the small distillery down the road from us. Mm-hmm. But there's so much more to the Beam story than just, the Jim Beam side. Mm-hmm. And we come down from Jacob, just like all the Beams. Jacob was the first Beam who came to Kentucky. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let this guy out. He makes an appearance at every show I do. It's usually toward the end, but now he wants to go out. So.
Yep, understandable.
All right.
Man, well, Kevin, on that one, can I ask you a question? Are you getting so that one in particular? I'm getting some like toasted coconut, like a little bit of like Girl Scout cookie on the nose, like the Samoan thing. The fruit's there, but there's a toasted coconut thing that's absolutely beautiful.
And I get like it's not really cinnamon toast crunch, but it's kind of that, like some sort of toasted cinnamon in it too. Almost like and the peach is absolutely there. It's maybe it's like you're making a little cobbler or something. Mm-hmm. But I get what you're saying about the Samoas.
There's a cereal too. I'm trying to think of the name of the cereal. It's not the toasted cinnamon, but it's I haven't eaten cereal in so long I kind of forget what it is. But it reminds me of, and it had peach and it had blueberry. This is more the peach kind, but an almond.
Nice.
Like a honey bunches of oats. Is that it? Anybody in the chat know what kind of cereal Steve's talking about?
And that's 17 months, and it doesn't drink like a 17-month.
Quit it. No. You're making me want to quit. It's so good. I mean, for 17 months, like if you blinded somebody on that, there's no way they would know that that was 17 months. They would have no clue whatsoever. And obviously, with the distillation itself, there's nothing faulty about it. It's beautiful. It's an excellent example. Like, I don't know, man. I wish that there was more rye whiskey out there that had characteristics even somewhat in the ballpark of this.
Yeah. Well, you know, the 100% malted, I had some from another craft distillery, gosh, 15 years ago. And I liked it. I liked mine better, but I liked it. And it is what pushed me. I was like, I'm going to, make some of that. And of course, malted rye does not yield a lot.
Right.
And it's expensive to buy. So it's an expensive bottle to make.
Well, and one of the other cool things, one of the things I absolutely love about these distillations with the rye in particular, with the malted rye. So people tend to think of rye as being spicy, right? You immediately get like either people go towards rye as spicy, or it's black pepper, or they go towards, MGP with the black cherry or the dill. This is a great example, and all the proof that anyone would ever need that rye is not overly spicy. There's some spice characteristics to it, but the characteristics are more like kind of course there's not really an anise flavor there, but the same kind of spiciness that you get from star anise. You get just a little bit of that, but it's not black pepper, it's not grains of paradise, it's not cayenne, it's not black cherry. Again, it's straight up peach fuzz when you bite into a fresh peach. It defies everything that people commonly nowadays think rye whiskey is.
And it's a little on the sweet side, actually, too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've certainly had weeded bourbons that were much spicier than what this is, without a doubt. Yeah, absolutely. So.
Yeah. I was saying, when you talk about the weeded, we did a experimental with, it was 51% wheat, 51% rye, 39% wheat, and 10% malt. And that's the one I wanted to send to you that I can't find. It's in storage someplace that I will find and send you some. And I took 2 bottles to London to give to our brand ambassador over there. And he opened one up, and I hadn't tasted it for a while. And Fonte is who, okayed it to go to the barrel. So I hadn't tasted it for a while. And it was absolutely fantastic, because it was just, it had that creaminess as well from the wheat, and that softness, and then but that still had that rye flavor. It was really delicious.
Nice.
So it was my second favorite thing that I've done out of the distillery.
And what was the impetus in general for the quarter cask program and for these mash bills? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but these mash bills, a lot of them only went into quarter cask, right? They didn't go into larger barrels, correct?
Correct. What I was doing is, me, I'm kind of like you. I like to try different things, like to try crazy things, and but I didn't want to make big commitments to it. So I figured we could do a run. At that time, we were running the 150-gallon pot still alembic, so we could do a run, and fill up a few quarter casks and then age it in a relatively short time, 15, 17 months, and get an idea as if it's working, and if we want to move forward or not move forward. So
yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I have to suspect too that these were because a lot of accounts don't want a full 53-gallon barrel. If it's a small restaurant or something, I would have imagined that this is right up their alley. I mean, the number of people that come into our place and just buy a half barrel, I can imagine being able to sell them A15 or 215s. I'll sell them 215s, and they can have 2 different whiskeys and have it for the same price almost as a half barrel. So
and it became affordable even for individuals. It was not out of the reach.
Right.
Out of reach some, but people could go together and get one and not be, have a crazy amount of bottles and not a crazy amount of expense. And that's why we also did them in the 375, because I wanted to stretch those barrels out,
Yep.
and let as many people try them as possible.
Well, my liver would like to thank you for putting them in 375s, just to be clear. So because they disappear very quickly when they show up here. So a fifth would just get me in all kinds of trouble that I don't need to be in. So for sure.
Yeah. See, this is the sad part, though. This is very, very low.
Yeah, I don't have many of those. I have something over here on the shelf. Oh, this is a regular bourbon that we did, and we did do some just regular bourbons in the quarter cask as well.
Mm-hmm. And when you were coming up with these, and obviously you're like me, you like to experiment, right? I think that's why we've been friends for so long, and for one reason is because we both like to experiment, and you've been a big inspiration to what I do. But I'm curious, like, how did you come up with, so for example, 100% malted rye, or any of these mash bills in general? Like, was it just things you're playing around with, like beer math, or just wondering what different grains did?
Just wondering what different grains, and Alan, I did not have a lot of a distilling experience when I started.
Yeah.
I had, you helped a lot, Sherman Owen helped me a lot of different people from moonshining background helped me get started. Mm-hmm. But I did. So I really wanted to learn more about the grains and eat the individual aspects of things. So I wanted to try these different things to see how they interacted. Just like when we got the still, I didn't want a still that you programmed. I didn't want a still that, you could put on autopilot. I wanted, an MG midget with the stick, that you had to drive.
Yes, 100 million%. Yeah.
So that I could learn why you're easing this back, or why you're making this cut, or why you're doing this. Mm-hmm. So, so that's why I did those. And then the mash bills, I just was being creative. I did a lot with caramel malt and chocolate malt. Mm-hmm. Boy, that first chocolate malt I did, oh my God, that was awful. If you've used chocolate malt, you use a little bit. And I think we used maybe 10% or more of the chocolate malt. And I walked in and I was like, what is burning?
We do a 10% chocolate malt corn whiskey, but we did that because I can't get anything in the well at a bar, right? Because everything's too expensive for most bars to want to put in the well. So I was like, well, what is like the one thing that's not out there that no one has? Like, just a straight up chocolate whiskey. That's literally all it is. And so you can do all kinds of weird, bartending and mixology with it. And I lucked out though. It turned out okay, thankfully.
Yeah.
So,
and but we did a 5% malt, a bourbon with 5% chocolate malt, and in a quarter cask, and it was my favorite thing I've ever made at the distillery, and I only have one bottle. When they bottled it while I was out out traveling, and when I got back to the distillery, they had it on the tasting counter, and I tasted. I was like, wow, that is fantastic. I want some. And they said, well, we have one bottle left.
Right. Mine.
Taking it.
Yes, it's mine. It's funny too, looking back on it now too, because knowing you as long as what I have, and I don't know that I've ever even kind of touched on this, but so for me, you being the first like real professional distiller that I knew, coming to Limestone Branch was always a big deal, because you guys would always like hand me a sample of something, and you were playing with all kinds of stuff from the get-go, whether it was, the TJ Pottinger Moonshine, which I loved, both versions of that, by the way. I don't know how much that you did is just like the sugar shine thing versus a little bit of the cooked corn, but I remember that was one of the first experiments you handed me was, here's what's the difference.
Right.
Or the flavored moonshines, or any of the early mash bills when you were doing the actual cooked grains, etc. Like that was a big deal to me, because even though I was playing around at home, didn't have money to do, anything weird like that. So that got me super interested in just exactly what can you do with distillation. And you were a great example of that, 100%. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And, and you've been an inspiration to me too. So, I mean, it works both ways, and it's great to know people like you, who are just crazy enough to try different things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Remember the experiment with cooking corn in the cooler with Sherman Owen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah.
Good times.
And but when we first opened, we had some distillery engineers come through, and they're like, well, but they had no concept how to do it at that scale.
Yeah.
No concept, because it does not, it's not a linear transgression or whatever, that you can't just go, okay, we're making 100,000 gallons. Now we're going to make 100 gallons,
Right.
So.
Yes. No, and I think that's always one of the things that's has always been really unique about what happens at Limestone Branch is the pot still distillation in particular. And, I think that was very reflective of the kind of person you are and the kind of personality you have. And it shows in the whiskeys. I mean, pot still whiskeys are always reflective of the people who are running them, and not just the town or the people that are running them, but, also the actual character of the person who's running them or overseeing them being ran, etc. They're always reflective of that, in my opinion. So, yeah, you took what I think is the best possible path for sure. Yeah. So
it's been a fun road, I'll tell you. So
right.
Well, let's move on down the road then and go after this 24-month. It is from Westport Whiskey and Wine here in Louisville. 107 barrel entry proof.
Oh man, I had just a little sip of the first one still left in the cup, and it was sitting there. And that time I got just a little bit of blood plum on the finish, just a little, still stone fruit, but more dark, flesh stone fruit. So. All right. So this one for me on the nose, that peach is still there as it always is, but it's bolstered by a little bit more. I don't want to use not really aggressiveness. It's bolstered by a little bit more of that almost star anise spice characteristic. It's there's a contrast between the fruit and the spice on this one that's much more prominent. This is the one that you like. The first one's the one I go to and I'm like, man, it's almost brandy like. It's almost like perfume. This one's the one I go to and I'm like, no, I want to come back to this one like every 3 or 4 minutes before I drink any of it and just keep enjoying that aroma. There's some caramel on the nose on this one as well.
I was going to say there's some confection in there, and I can't put my finger on it. It's not marzipan, but
thank you.
So some people have marzipan. I figured out what my out is when I can't put my finger on a confectionery note. You know what I say? Because here's the fat kid tasting note, just like with Mike and Kevin and all of us. So that aroma of like when you cook brownies and you put confectioner's sugar on it. Right. Because everybody be like, yeah, I know that aroma. And it just looks like they're saying, yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
I get a little bit of mocha on it, on the nose.
Yeah, I could see that. I think some of that cinnamon is still there too, Kevin, and maybe there might even be a little bit of that kind of almost like Mayan chocolate kind of characteristic with that mocha.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
But I wouldn't have caught that mocha note immediately unless you had mentioned it, but it's definitely in there.
Right. Now this one, to me, drinks a little spicier, a little bit hotter. Yeah. And like you said, not as a little bit more the the traditional spice of a rye, but not overly spicy. What most people think of as when they think of the rye, and I think that with the malting, that tones that down as well.
I think so too. This one is chewy, absolutely. Like it's unctuous and it's got an awesome mouthfeel to it. And on the exhale, especially on the finish, that's when that peach skin thing to me comes way to the forefront. I mean, honestly, again, this is what people wish that peach brandy actually tasted like.
Yeah.
Is the funny thing. So everybody's all excited about peach brandy because they think it tastes like peaches, and then find out that it tastes like buttered popcorn. This is, if you want something that you wish peach brandy tasted like, this is the closest you're going to get to what you have in your mind. And I think that's one of the reasons. Oh yeah, you're all good. I think that's one of the reasons why I love it, because the aroma on it almost always reminds me of like when we would make peach brandy from Fleener peaches and we do an actual peach mash brandy. It has almost that same aroma to it.
Yeah.
Of the mash.
Especially like as you said on the exhale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of that finish.
Again, guys, don't go look for these. Don't buy them. Leave them on the shelf. Leave them on the shelf.
They're not going to find them. I'll tell you.
I know.
That's the problem.
Yeah. So, and this is something I'd like to hear the two of you discuss some, is any unique fermentation techniques or distillation techniques that you use in these 100% malted rye experimental collections?
You know, we pretty much just fermented it like as our normal mash. We ferment about 86 degrees, usually in about 36 hours, a little over 36 to 48 hours. Well, no, about 48 hours on that.
It's pretty good fermentation. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't do long fermentations. It's 40 hours, 2 days and a half. We're usually finished up.
Gotcha.
But we do use Miner's yeast strain. Mm-hmm. So we have Miner Case Beams yeast strain that we use.
Awesome.
And so we do that. And really trying to think of anything special. I know because Alan asked me, what I was doing special. And it's like, really, I think honestly, it comes down to a lot of the flora and fauna that live in the distillery. Honestly.
I would say that I would come put a jar across the street from you guys, but I'm pretty sure somebody beat me to that years ago because they couldn't dial it in quite right. So
yeah, well, there was someone who had an issue like that.
Yes, absolutely. So, Steve, when you on the technical side, when you guys mash this in, are you basically treating it the same way you would like 100% malted barley sort of recipe?
Yeah, with the rye, we mashed in at about 173, right in the 170s. I can't remember precise right offhand.
Right.
Because we do with malt, we'll do just over 154. I like to get up about 160 and then bring it down. I'm afraid if I go much below 160, we don't get we don't kill off everything.
Yeah, you don't get the pasteurization.
Right, that I'm trying to get. But with the rye, can't remember, we did 173 or 176, somewhere in that range, I think. And that's usually where we add our rye into our bourbon as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's another one of those pieces of information I gleaned onto from you years ago, was right in that 170, 173 mark for raw rye in particular.
Right.
We don't always do that at Spirits of French Lick, but we have done that many times, and sort of helps with foaming a little bit for sure too. And it doesn't need that long scalding period as well.
Right.
But I always ask about rye mash bills like that and the way that people cook them, especially ryes that don't have corn in them, because, looking into Pennsylvania, talking with Laura Petruzio and, talking to Leopold over the years, the old Pennsylvania method of making rye, they did more of a beer method. So they did a step up mash as opposed to a step down. So I'm always curious the details of how people do it, because even in the Pennsylvania methods, although from distillery to distillery, they mirror each other to some degree. It's the same way it is in Kentucky. Everybody has their own specific temperature,
Right.
up to 145. They get their conversion. And then in Pennsylvania, a lot of times they would go to at least 161, 162 for 15 minutes just to get that pasteurization in there. So I'm echoing for some reason. I apologize.
Yeah, we bring it down. We brought it down, but we never even went up that high because, like with the bourbon with the corn, we'll go over 200. But
yeah,
with the rye, and then with the malted rye as well, it's a little bit different than a hard raw rye.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I haven't. I talked to you about it recently. I'm working on some rye stuff with a very good friend of mine that has some antique mash bills from his great grandfather via Shinley, and I've been playing around with some of the step mash rye stuff. And while I think it's interesting, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that it's necessary at all, and this definitely convinces me it's not necessary to begin with. And secondarily, I don't think it makes as high a quality as just doing up to 173 and then coming back down. But maybe I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. I'm going to have to pull on Todd Leopold's ear a little bit and see what he thinks. So,
and see, we didn't go up. We didn't bring it up to 173.
Yeah.
We put it in at
The 173. Yep. And then came down from
held
there.
it there for 15 or 20 minutes, not very long, and then dropped it down.
Yep. So the steps are like, usually if you're doing we'll just say for this example, Pennsylvania style, we'll just say 80% rye, 10% rye malt, 10% barley malt. They'd usually throw the rye malt, the barley malt in at like 110, hold it there for 10 or 15 minutes, go up to 125 or 130, hold for another 10 or 15 minutes, 145, hold for 30 minutes. At the 130 mark, they would have added the raw rye as they're coming up on the rise, held that with their malt at 145, get the conversion they can, then up to 160, then back down. It's honestly, it's a pain is what it is. It's an absolute pain in the ass to do. So, but yeah. And this certainly makes, in my opinion, a much better rye whiskey than I've been able to do with the stupid step mash thing. So I love Pennsylvania, but I'm not doing step mash anymore. It's not happening.
And I'm telling you, like I said, we would just leave it in 15, 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we would get it be a half hour or so, but
right.
It was, and then we bring it down as fast as we could.
Yeah. And the nice thing about that too, is that's a fairly quick process. So from a production standpoint, you could do a couple of those in a day pretty easily.
Right.
Because compared to doing a bourbon mash and having to hold for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, at 190 or whatever you hold at, that takes a good, 7-8 hour day easily. This, you could probably do 2 of them in that same time period, more than likely. So,
right.
But, and so this one to me, the other one was again, light, fruity, very much like a brandy. This one has got all the aroma and flavor of a brandy, but it's bold, it's heavier. The candy's still there, and there's actually a little bit of a minerality on the palate in particular that I think helps hold it together. Almost like a little bit of a white wine minerality that helps hold it together. That one's a dangerous one. Absolutely. That one's getting like regrettable Facebook posts the night of.
And we put these in. We started putting them in at 100 proof, because I was going to bottle them at 100 proof, right around there, and the proof dropped in the quarter cask.
Yep.
So we ended up with 94, and then we started putting them in higher, so that we could bottom at 100 proof. But then we just kept them at 94.
And see, I think that's one of the beautiful things about it too, is when even if you come out that lower proof, not having to add any water to it, it's just a pure expression of the distillation and the barrel itself, and the barrel's actually maturing the whatever water compounds are there along with the whiskey itself. And we have the same thing in our outside warehouses where we keep our rye whiskey. We do 105 entry on pretty much all the whiskeys, and the inside barrel room, it'll climb to 114, 115 from 105. The other warehouses, I'm skirting the line of how much of that can I put in there and maintain bottled and bond. because
Right.
some of them are coming out, 96, 97, 98, which I love for single barrels. I think that's
Right.
great. So,
Right. Well, I have an old gauger report from the Dant distillery in in the 1890s, and all the barrels were right around 100 proof.
Yep.
So they were putting them in at 100 proof, right at 100 proof, a little bit over 100, but right in there, and then they were bottling them at 100 proof.
Yeah.
They may have gone a little bit higher, and these were a little bit older, and they were right at 100 proof. But that's where they bottled them. So they weren't adding water to it.
Exactly. That's one of the things I love about doing that with that warehouse too, is like if we pull down bottled and bond, and again, I have to be careful so I stay above 100. But so far, most of the blends for bottled and bond with the rye or the high rye bourbon we've done, they've come out at like 102, maybe 103.
Right.
As long as we blend the correct direction. And then you're talking, you're only adding overall 15 gallons of water maybe to 20 barrel dumps at one time,
Right.
which I love the idea of that. I think that's
right.
that's as,
Absolutely.
that's as pure as it can be. It's you intend it to be a 100 proof anyways, and let's stick with it. So but I could certainly sell more of them if they were at higher proof as single barrels, because everybody's obsessed with hazmat now, but
Right.
we make up for it with the apple brandy. So
this is one of the barrels. I don't know if you necessarily gauge the size there. That's a Corey Welch barrel. Look at that.
a swamp squirrel.
Swamp squirrel. And this was, here's my lovely wife.
Nice.
And you can kind of get some sort of perspective on the barrels. And you can see she's standing in the middle of the little storage trailer. And there were barrels on both sides from floor to ceiling. And that was taken about a little over 2 years ago. And then this is kind of where things
Where we're
stood.
at now. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're kind of running low on this, Steve. What are we?
Yeah, we're kind of winding down the program. Yellowstone's been insanely successful, which is great. But then there becomes need to focus on certain things as well. So, I'm out running around the country now a lot, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to keep up with the program like that. So
so there are still a few barrels left to bottle.
There are a few,
but not a lot. And I was very pleased. I was at the distillery, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, and saw this one on the shelf, 45 months. So we've gone from 17 to 24 to now 45 months. So if you haven't already poured your 45-month sample, do that, and we'll give that a try.
I keep waiting on my my phone to go off with a notification that says Limestone Branch Quarter Cask Appreciation and Collector Society Group. Join now.
So this has really nice legs. The other ones didn't have the legs like this one has. If you look at the legs on that one, it was. Yeah.
You can even feel the viscosity of that pouring it out of the bottle compared to the other two, the way that it pours from the bottle. It definitely has some viscosity to it. And that's got a nice orangish color to it too.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see, this is the 17-month color.
Oh.
And that's the 45-month color. So it's hard to tell on that, but you can definitely see that it's a good bit darker.
Mm-hmm.
At least I can, sitting here staring at it in front of me.
This one automatically to me on the nose is more like baked peach cobbler. And then there's a nice herbal note in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find that interesting, that herbal note that you get with the rye sometimes
Mm-hmm.
is more prevalent in this one for me than the other ones.
It definitely is. It's much bigger here. And it's an interesting, that's one of those notes too. So for me, it always comes off as like, I think of horehound candy, or like Christy says, eucalyptus. So here's a weird thing, Steve. I was talking about this with Drew Crawley earlier, and I've talked about it with Kevin before as well. It's very similar to like the noses that I get on a lot of our Spirits of French Lick stuff, and the nose that I used to get on a lot of the stuff when I was making stuff at home. And I've tried to figure out for years whether or not that's I played around with different varieties of yeast. I've played around with different styles of stills, etc. And I cannot put my finger on what causes that. And it's not always even brown spirits. Sometimes it's even white spirits. I get that nose. And I've just come to the conclusion that it has to be something to do with distillation style, right? And even if it's not a common thing, maybe it's something that happens every once in a while with a distillation where you pick that up.
And I picked that up every once in a while in some of the major brands, honestly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what I'm thinking is that this barrel was passed over at a younger age because those notes were too strong.
That would make sense. That is really good though. That one is like that out of all of them, obviously, and I think that the maturity has something to do with it. That one has got the overall structure of it. The tannins are working towards the structure. They're not, coming through as overly tannic at all.
No.
They're really building a nice background and a playground for those herbal notes and those peach notes to really kind of dance around on and give it a nice foundation overall. It really drinks a lot like as far as the mouthfeel goes, it drinks a lot like a nice single malt scotch would drink as far as the mouthfeel and the way that it plays.
Yeah, I would not have drawn that similarity, but when you say it,
mm-hmm.
It definitely.
Yeah. The horehound candy comment, I think, is right on target.
Yeah.
When I first tried it, that was the thought that popped in my head.
But see, that at a younger age comes off too strong,
mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that's why this one was left to be as old as it was.
I'm glad it got left. I'm thankful to have it in the glass right now for sure. Man, there's some kind of with all these tastes and these aromas that you get from whiskey or any spirits. One of the things that makes it so special is obviously it's unique to every individual, and there's certain memories associated with it. And I'm sure you guys have had this. There's some memory associated with that peach and that herb flavor at the same time, but there's something primal in me that knows that I've had that at some point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tied to a memory from childhood that is gone. It's like the last little shadow of that memory just lingering in there. Like there's something that just is very, very familiar and unique about that. Could probably wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and text Kevin and be like, I remember what it was.
Do it. Oh man.
Yeah. So you guys have had stack cakes, right? Like Steve, you probably had stack cakes. Kevin, you probably did too.
Yep.
So peach stack cakes, but then put just a little sprig of spearmint on the side of the stack cake. And it's right there for sure. Now I want stack cakes because a fat kid.
This one is definitely drier because it's drying out my palate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell that that it is older. That there are there's some oakiness there. There's some tannins there, but not in an obnoxious way at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and maybe you talking about spearmint. I'm thinking a little bit of a mint tea, not overly minted, but it kind of has that dark tea flavor profile in it with a touch of mint.
Yeah. I see there you go. You got stack cakes and some tea with little mint in it. Good to go. That's a good Sunday.
Horehound candy.
Back
cobbler.
Back at Mamaw's house.
Yes, absolutely. I can picture the porch, the screened-in porch at Mamaw's house. Yeah.
So good.
And that's where she put the stack cake because it was cool out there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I need about 10 of those little barrels of this to be. I just won't drink anything else for the rest of my life. It'll just be just go to those.
Well, see, the thing that's dangerous about stuff like this is if you just sit down and you start sipping it, you'll get something the first time. And then you'll keep sipping in that glass. And then it's like, wait a minute, what was that? Oh, well, I don't have enough of my glass to explore that. So I need to
go back to it. Got to go back to it.
And then it just.
That's what I was just about ready to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last one that I had, the last one of these bottles that you gave me, Kevin, I ended up, the last thing I remember was watching Looney Tunes at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Legitimately. So, but you know, as a distiller, I think that what I really love about these in general is that they're great distillations to start with. There's not anything faulty. There's not anything weird in them. They're not out of balance, especially in the quarter cask. Like the quarter cask for these work freaking phenomenally. I mean, they're amazing. But the other nice part about it is this is one of the very few whiskeys. And Kevin, you know in particular how I am. You know, I'm kind of burnt out on bourbon in general. But I'm sort of with these. They're one of the very few whiskeys I can sit down and drink, and I'm not over analyzing them. I'm enjoying them as a consumer actually would, as opposed to looking for things or trying to find any sort of fault or anything wrong with it or any of that stuff. I'm just enjoying it. So
no, you and I've talked about this before, Alan, where as a consumer enthusiast, whatever you want to call it, there are things that you would pick up on or Steve would pick up on in a whiskey. And okay, well, there's a fault there, and it's something that has to do with this distillation, or the cut was wrong here, and I may never notice it, and I get the, you know, the ignorance is bliss, blessing of being able to just sit and drink it and enjoy it, and don't have to get into that. But when you find something that, you know, has no faults in it that are going to irritate you, that's a point where you can just sit back and enjoy drinking it, right?
Yeah, and Steve can speak to this too, because see, I get to be in the easy seat tonight because Steve's the one being interviewed. So Steve knows that when you drink your own whiskey, it becomes hard to enjoy your own whiskey because you're constantly going, well, shit, I could have done this or that or yeah. And so, but for me, this one's fantastic because it's from a great distiller. It knows what they're doing. It tastes good and it's enjoyable. And by the way, if anyone messages us and says that they put this on the rocks or put it in a cocktail, I will hunt you down and I will kill you.
Yeah, this does not need to be on the rocks. Don't have to add water to it. No. This is a neat.
No. So if you've got a little left of the three, if you want to do a little side by side and just kind of give your compare and contrast thoughts, I think some of our notes as we've gone will kind of lead towards that as well. I tell you what, when that 17-month on the nose just gets me, man. It just does.
Yeah. And I think Drew, for me on that one, Drew's comment in particular, when I talked to him earlier, like I said, the peach fruit ring things, like the gummy ring things, that's 100% nose on that for me. And that's a positive thing. That's going back to, you know, being 5 years old and, hey, Mom, can I have that?
Right.
So,
right.
I definitely getting the cinnamon toast cereal like you were talking about earlier, Kevin, on this now.
Okay, are you? And this isn't an exact match, but have you had the old Potrero 100% malted dry?
I have not.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a similar nose there. I was trying to think where I'd had it before, and I thought, well, duh, you've had this before. This is probably you're about to finish the last of your third bottle of it. So yes, you've had it before, but the old Potrero has a little bit of a similar nose to it. It's a little bit more cinnamon than this is, but
I could see that.
yeah.
So what's interesting for me coming back to this, so the Whorehound Candy / mint, it's there in this, but it's buried very, very far at the back on the nose. It's there. It just hasn't came to the forefront.
I've got to figure out a way.
About 17 months was about as early as you could get these. 17, 18 months.
Yep.
Was about as early as these would work out. 22 to 24 was kind of a sweet spot. But then obviously, we hadn't aged, had extra age at that time. And, because everybody says you cannot leave whiskey in a quarter cask for 4 years. Yeah. Because a big distillery in Frankfurt did an experiment, 15 years ago and said quarter casks make terrible whiskey. So
right.
That's been the rule ever since.
They didn't have the pot still or the personnel, as they would say.
So that's a way to bully out some of your small competition too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But you and Gary Heingardner in particular have both been fantastic with the quarter cask stuff. I mean, you guys have really, and it's cool that you're both used McGinnis as well. Right. And again, finding quality wood and finding quality cooperage and paying attention to that is, that's definitely helpful. But no, they're all excellent. Go back to
that was, you talk about the wood, and that is one thing when people ask, if you would like to, ask like one of your ancestors about things, I would love to sit down and talk to J.W. Dant, especially, not just about the whiskey that he made, but he went out, he had his own cooperage, and he went out and hand selected all the trees that would go into that.
Oh, wow.
So, I would love to know why he was choosing trees from certain areas. And, I just love to know because all that really, I think, and don't get me wrong, the cooperage is now a great job. But I think that, we're going to take these trees here and not this tree here. And, that is definitely gone.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And yeah, what the specs are, the geography, what slopes, what the topography is, the whole thing would be worthwhile to know. So there's no doubt that that those guys in that generation, they knew a lot of things that we as distillers are never going to know. 100 million %, unfortunately.
Because you didn't have to know it.
Right.
Yes.
You didn't have to know it.
Right.
And
that, was generations of trial and error.
Right.
Yeah. And I wonder about that oftentimes too, with even things of like, say you're making your own malt for this, Steve, right? And there's several guys out there making their own malt, and more power to them. I think it's awesome if you're doing that. But I think back to conditions of what those old distilleries were like and how under modified a lot of that malt probably was, but how that positively affected the flavor in general versus, optimizing the malting process, etc.
Right.
I'm not sure that optimizing the malting process, if you're making your own, is necessarily the best possible option for making whiskey, pre-pro style in particular. So,
well, Pat Heist and Shane over at Wilderness Trail, when they first opened up, they were all about chemistry and, get everything, just like that. And that was one of the first things they said is that we thought we were doing it, all clean and almost sterile room type thing. And it was, they said they made it too clean.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So they did. And, there's something to be said about, that flora and everything that is just in that, in each distillery.
Yeah. As opposed to stripping out all the character. And here's a funny thing I was thinking about this week that I think ties into the show pretty well. So you have the absolutely no chemist allowed thing at Stitzelweller, right? And then you have the practical distiller side of things. And then you have Jerry Dalton, who was a chemist, right? But Jerry is also, he's a spiritual person. And so therefore that gives him a little leeway with his belief system, I think, in particular, to be able to come off of some of the chemistry thing and let things happen. And of course, tied in, to the Beam family as well. Somewhere else, I think that I'm sure at some point they said to him, hey, maybe, the chemistry thing is great and we're learning from it and we're doing cool stuff, but also make sure that you keep the character in it. And I think Jerry is one of those people who could walk that line. But I think that would be a very fun thing with most modern day chemists, I would say, I believe. So,
and I think that was that Beam generation, because I've talked to some of the cousins of because I didn't get into that, but minor case, my great grandfather and his younger brother Joe. Joe had 7 sons, and then my grandfather was like a son as well, so there were 8 of them. And after Prohibition, they went around and opened up pretty much all the distilleries. You're talking about Shenley and Stitzelweller, just all of the old distilleries. They got back up and running again, and I think that they all did not want chemists in their distilleries.
Well, that was one of the really interesting things about going with my business partner that I'm working on. Ken Schreiner, who we've had on Distillers Talk in the past, looking at his grandfather's notebooks, his great grandfather's notebooks. I could identify from knowing you and seeing the stuff that you had from your family, and then also knowing some of the Shenley background and some of the Seagram's background. I can tell when there's something written in those books that came directly from the Beams, just by the way it's written and the way that it's talked about, versus this came from a manual that was issued by a company later on, right? And they almost very much so, the old Will McGill versus the big guys sort of conversation there. So,
and you know who taught Will McGill, don't you?
Oh yeah, yep, yep. That's one of those names I wish we heard more often in the industry, though. As well,
and because he made great whiskey that everybody, crazy about. Yeah, and you never hear his name ever.
That's one of the things I told Jerry the other day. You're in good company. You and Will McGill. You're, the two that have, and Will was married into the family, obviously, but kind of in the same kind of situation in a lot of ways, and that's, you're definitely right up there with them for sure. So, but out of all 3 of these guys, and I'm curious your opinions, for me, I love all 3 of them. I absolutely love all 3 of them, but it's funny, like even when we pick single barrels from Spirits of French Lick, I'm always the odd guy out. I think it has something to do with, more of a palate for brandy. But for me, number 2, the what is it, the
24
or 24? Yep. That is that's right up my alley right there. That's
yeah. And like I said, that is where I marked the sweet spot for the barrels, was 22 to 26 month.
Yep.
Was the sweet spot for those barrels.
And I absolutely love that one.
Yeah. I think you get something unique in each of them.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of it. And I think that's why a conversation like this is interesting and important, is, it shows same mash bill, just a little bit of difference in age and the difference that it makes in the whiskey.
Right.
Steve, I know this is kind of a convoluted question, and I know it's sort of short-term aging anyways, in a very unique situation, in a very small area. But were you ever able to see differences even in that little rick house?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
from the top to the bottom, and if it was by the doors, where the sun was shining on it, or where it wasn't. Yes, there was definitely a difference in that small of space.
And was there a spot in particular that you found to be like the sweet spot? Like, did you ever roll out a barrel from the distillery and say that one goes here? Right.
I think the sweet spot which is, I would not have guessed it would be that way, but in the small, container was about the same spot that I like them in big rick houses. And that is, upper middle, about three barrels in from a window.
Nice.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. I'm still like staring at my warehouses going, I don't know. Like, I know what I know what I don't like in at least in the warehouse attached to the building, but I haven't figured out exactly what I do like on a consistent level yet. Of course, we're still pretty young to do that, but I can tell you, if you come for a single barrel pick at Spirits of French Lick, the back barrels against the wall on the bottom, just don't even ask to drill them, because I'm not drilling them for you. It's not happening. So
yeah. But they, the interesting thing, and I don't know if you've done this, but some of the best barrel picks I've picked have been half full barrels.
yes,
You know, they've leaked, and and I got on the guys because I was like, "Are you?" Anyway, like,
I know exactly where you're going. Yes, I get it.
and so they had a barrel. And I didn't find out about this until it was too late, but they, instead of holding the white dog or the white spirit in a stainless, they filled up, half of the quarter cask and put it on the rack.
Yep. I'll tell you,
was fantastic.
Yeah.
But very expensive.
I guarantee it. And so we've experienced that too, with like a half full barrel or even a quarter full barrel. And I think it's because you get so much more oxidative effect with the alcohol in particular.
Yeah.
It's just a huge difference. Absolutely. And so the biggest thing we see it with is apple brandy. Seems to really show better once it's been oxidized quite a bit. And of course, we barrel that at still proof, so it's going in at 135, 138, somewhere in there. So my favorite one, and I'll throw this in there for you because I think you'll understand the pains of this, and bearing in mind that I don't own anything, I've never owned anything. My favorite one is when someone goes to pull a sample, and of course we drill barrels, and maybe they've had a couple and they forget to put a spile back in the barrel. Yeah. I don't own anything.
And
I don't own anything, and that pisses me off. I'll just tell you right now, like, it's not good. It's not good.
Yeah, I mean, everybody sees the thieves and they think, the distiller's going in there with those thieves. I was like, no, we don't. We drill barrels.
We got drills.
Nobody uses a thief unless you're, on camera or something.
Yeah.
Drills and cedar spiles. That's our game. Well, the problem is that, so I get it. Like, if you drill a hole, right, and sometimes they don't always run real well. And if you're on a barrel pick or something and it doesn't leak much, you don't think anything of it. But yeah, I'm glad. They should be glad that I don't own anything, because it would be a conversation for sure. So,
and the crazy thing about those little cedar spiles, that there's a company in Lebanon where a little lady makes those things.
Really?
Yeah, by hand. She's like,
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I was like,
you need to find us her address, and we, as distillers, we all need to pitch in and send her the greatest Christmas of all time is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Because this poor lady, can you imagine having to do that all day? Oh my word. That'd be a terrible job.
It's like half the size of a golf tee, if people don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've used raw golf tees before because I ran out of spiles. There's still a couple barrels floating around in the warehouse with golf tees sticking out of them. You do what you got to do. So,
So with the experimental collection program winding down, what are you going to do with that container?
We're doing different experience with the tours. So, yeah.
Okay. So
Visitor experience, yeah.
So it won't be sold out of the gift shop or anything like that, or break it down into little pieces, commemorative pieces.
that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's try this Yellowstone Family Recipe.
Okay.
And I will tell you right now that in 2022, this was my personal whiskey of the year.
Steve,
and I'll get into why in a few minutes. So,
real quick, kind of offbeat question here, and you don't necessarily have to answer it on the show, but is there any chance of a craft distiller in Southern Indiana getting one of those empty 15-gallon barrels for an experiment?
if we have any left,
Okay. Yep.
I'll make sure you get one.
Yeah.
I think there may be one or two kicking around.
That would be fantastic. So, funny thing about the Yellowstone family recipe here. So, the first bottle, it was the Yellowstone. It was the first one I think that you won the award on, the blend that you did. Sean White and I, who was our salesperson at Spirits of French Lake at the time, and I used to give Sean so much trash. I'd be like, you will never be half the salesman that Fonte is. It's just never going to happen unless you master an accent and put on a shirt that's not pink and doesn't have an alligator on it. It's not happening. He gets so mad. But anyways, came down to visit you and you gave me that bottle and gave me the shirt. And all the way home, Sean's like, I want that bottle. I'll buy it from you. I'm like, no. He goes, come on, man. I'm driving you home. I'm like, I didn't have to take you to Yellowstone. Just saying. It became a whole point of conflict there for a second. In the best possible way. Just friends
right.
Playing around.
This is, if I have my facts straight, a Guy Beam mash bill using the minor case bean yeast. Is that correct?
Correct. 6 year, at least 6 year. There's some 7 and 8 in there as well.
Yeah.
It's basically every barrel we made from the start of the distillery, except for 2 that we kept. Every barrel that we made from the start of the distillery up until things that were 6 years old.
Mm-hmm. The white corn on this one?
White corn.
White corn.
Yep. So that's the first thing that pops out to me is that corn knows the positive attributes of corn is there. It's not covered up by the barrel. It's not hidden by the barrel. It smells like all the positive things you could possibly imagine from corn coming through distillation without any of the negative volatiles coming off of it.
Right. Mm-hmm. I think white corn, you get, that's why I went with white corn. I think you get a little bit less of that canned corn.
Yep.
The volatiles that come off of the white corn as you do of a yellow corn.
There's definitely like fresh baked, slightly toasted, cornbread coming off the nose, along with the oak complements as well, or even a little bit of like grits coming off on the nose, which I really, really like.
Yeah, when we released this, I told some of the press when we first did it, I said, this is going to be a polarizing release because people who are column still bourbon drinkers will probably not understand what this is because it is, richer. It has more of the fusel oils. It's pot still. It is not column still.
Yeah. On the palate, like the toasted corn thing is there. And then there's a lot of red fruit coming across, like kind of going in the raspberry, blackberry direction. You get a nice, very clean spiciness at the back. Again, like grains of paradise as opposed to black pepper. It's not all over the palate. It's at the back and it comes up the middle of the tongue. The body is completely rounded. Again, it's chewy like that rye was as well. Mm-hmm. It's oily. It's got a great mouthfeel. Definitely for sure represents all the better qualities of what pot still can do.
And a lot of that, Alan, was really rudimentary equipment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We were basically barely above a moonshining,
yep.
Because we were fermenting in, 550 gallon square totes.
Yep.
That had water jackets on the back, but we're hard to control temperature wise. Mm-hmm. We had to shut down in the summertime because we just couldn't do it in the summer. We had the container that we had turned into the stripping still.
Yep. I remember that. Yeah.
Yep. And then the 150 gallon pot still. A lot of people don't realize, back in 2008, when I started looking at this, there were not Vendome did not make small stills.
No.
They had one like 35-gallon thing that they made, and I remember talking to one of the Shermans, and he's like, well, this craft distillery thing, I don't know if it's going to last or not, and there were very, very few manufacturers of small pot stills or of pot stills, that were not commercial, huge things. And that's why we had to do a lot of the equipment. Paul down at MD Roland, he built a lot of his equipment. It's just, you did what you had to do to get going. And we didn't have unlimited funds.
And it made great whiskey, as is evidence here. And that's the other thing I would say too, is for anybody, I always have to play to the home distiller crowd to some degree, but for anybody who is a home distiller that wants to become a professional legal distiller, bear in mind what Steve is saying and the quality of spirit that's in this glass right now. Or if you ever get to try it, if you go somewhere and they tell you that if you don't have $1 million, don't even think about starting a distillery, it's probably not worth your time to go to that place, in my opinion. So, because it doesn't have to be that way at all. There's other options out there, and other people that will gladly take a quarter of the money to teach you.
Yeah. And I think, when you don't have a lot of money and you need to be creative, I think you end up with great products as well.
Yeah, you walk into it too with the mindset of, I'm doing this, even if they say that it can't be done this way. They don't know. They've never done it this way, and that's what you guys did. Right. And you guys were real pioneers in that in a lot of ways. I mean, you guys started at a time where there were not many other craft distillers out there. Right. And they certainly weren't in a ring talking to one another, very often on any scale. So,
and we didn't have the multi-million-dollar investments that subsequently came in the craft distilling movement.
Right, 100%.
The thing that stands out to me about this is, it took balls to make this, okay? Because you had a Yellowstone bourbon product.
Right.
And you created something that does not mimic that flavor profile at all. This is, I mean, I love the other. It tends to be more towards a sweeter profile than this.
Right.
This is much more earthy. There's more tobacco in it. There's leather in it. There's some very nice fruit notes in it. But it's
cedar. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what I loved about it. Is it was a bold choice to go that direction with it. And you knocked it out of the park.
Well, I tell people, one of the things with being, propelled into the arena of a big brand with Yellowstone, which has happened. We're get this, 28th largest selling bourbon in the country. Now that sounds 28, but there's a lot of bourbon.
Pretty impressive, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I'm like 348 or some shit like that.
Yeah, we're ahead of some brands that you would think would be, but anyway, and we have to strive to make the Yellowstone Select the exact same every time.
Right.
And there's something to that, and that's a skill as well.
Sure.
But it bores me to tears.
Right.
Because I like to do the oddball stuff. And while we do that, and it's great, and it, but this is the kind of stuff that I like. And as we talked earlier, Kevin, and I said, when I release this, and I said it's going to be polarizing, people will either like it or they won't like it. But if you're making something that everybody likes, you're probably making something that's pretty boring, honestly. Right? I mean, you want things to stand out. You want, some people don't like it. That's fine. We don't make enough anyway.
Right. 100%.
Please don't like his bourbon.
Steve, was there ever a moment that you had like in general and so I understanding obviously the consistency thing is boring. I understand that 1,000,000%.
But necessary.
But
if you're going to
necessary,
build a
yes.
brand,
Yep,
it is
1,000,000%.
100% necessary.
Was there ever a moment though, like I guess what was like the crossover moment? Is there one moment in time where you're like, oh hell, like something is happening here with the brands? Was there any one product or any one moment or anything like that that you can think of?
Well, obviously the TV show just propelled Yellowstone into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And we became a brand that people knew.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of had to pinch yourself to see, because the sales numbers were insane, and it was just you would go and people would know, because I was used to going to places and saying Yellowstone and people wouldn't know what the hell wouldn't know.
Right.
Of course, everybody thought it was from the show, but we've been around for 150 years. But
yeah. You went from having to do the Steve Beam rap, like we all have our backstory, right? You have to do the
Right.
Steve Beam Dant rap, to just walking in and being like, oh yeah, we sell Yellowstone. This is what we do. You've heard of us.
Yes.
For sure. Yes.
It is. It's kind of crazy. But in a good way, but it's it's different for sure.
Yeah. Well, it was well earned, 100% well earned. And man, I'll just tell you, those that rye whiskey in general is, in my opinion, has been and remains the best American rye whiskey out there. And Leopold's up there. Don't get me wrong. I love Todd's 3-chamber stuff in particular. This is more my alley as far as I'm concerned. A rye whiskey and what a rye whiskey can be. That's 1,000,000% what.
Well, I appreciate it. And when I was, people may not know this, but I was trained as a landscape architect and spent the first 25 years of my life, doing landscape design and build. But when your peers would say, that is a really nice project you did, that meant a lot more than just the general public. Not to get anything wrong, because that's great. And but when you have people who know what they're talking about say something like that, Alan, that really means a lot,
Absolutely. So. Wow. And again, well earned. So absolutely. We just got to find a way to get this to come back, right? It should be like a new Coke and go back to old Coke.
If someone happens to Ocean's 11 the remaining barrels out of that container,
5602 South State 60.
Alan and I had nothing to do with it. Alan and I have a perfect alibi.
Yes. 1,000,000% we do. I also have a backhoe that can make shipping containers disappear. I'm just saying. It's a thing that can happen.
What's security like around there?
Right. Well,
if the TTV's listening, it is very secure.
I'm sure it's very secure.
It's Fonte sitting on top of the box with a cigar. It's just waiting. Just every night, Fonte going, I wish someone would. I can't do the accent, or I would.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Foghorn Leghorn,
Yes.
That's
yes.
But we're there 24 hours a day. There's somebody at the distillery 24 hours a day, 360 days a year. So it's pretty.
So we got 5 days, Alan. We got 5 days on the calendar.
Fair enough.
Oh, seriously. So what's coming up next from Limestone Branch?
Well, I still remain to do innovative stuff. A lot more cast finish. And I know Alan's not necessarily a fan of cast finish, but there's a lot of cast finish things. This year, the 2023 I have somewhere is in a Tokai finish barrel.
Oh,
okay.
So this was this was one of the samples that we did when we were I'm pulling samples we pulled them every week with the Tokai, and they finished very quickly. So that's what this year's will be. We did the toasted barrel release. I don't know if you've tried that.
Yep. Our
toasted barrel was great, and that was actually those toasted barrels that I'd used in the limited edition in 2016, 17, 18. I got those barrels, and I was like, these barrels have made great whiskey. I can't just send them off to the graveyard, So I
earn their keep. Yes.
let's just stick some 4-year-old in there, and we'll set it back in the warehouse and see what happens. And so 4 years later, so an 8-year whiskey, that's what those ended up being, and they're pretty good. They're all single barrel, because we're doing them a barrel at a time. We had like 30 barrels. That's it. And so it's
I thought the toasted barrel was outstanding. That was really well done.
Yeah, and I like to be creative, so there'll always be some creative things around. I just can't, and that's why Alan and I we joke about this, or we talk about this a lot, about that master distiller thing. And you called me a master distiller, and I did not use that name for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And after 10 years, I was kind of like crowned that from the company. But, I figure after 10 years, that's how long Minor Case was before he was called a master distiller.
You went through the apprenticeship program. You earned it. Yes.
Right. I've made, I've made brandy, I've made gin, I've made absinthe, I've made, bourbon, rye. And you can tell me whatever you want to make, and I can make it.
Nice. Yeah. There's nothing. You earned it. That's the difference, right?
More of these. Don't. That's what we want you to make. More of these.
I'll throw another one in there too. And I doubt the chances of this are very high. But what are the chances of getting a barrel influenced version of that gin one of these days?
That's a possibility.
Good. It should be, because it's
yeah.
That gin was a great fun project that I enjoyed. I love this industry, and I love doing what I'm doing because I have a good time, and I make things that I like, and I hope other people like them as well.
Yes. Yeah. And absolutely they do, or at least I definitely do, and Kevin definitely does. I mean, you honestly, Steve, behind the scenes, between Kevin and Kevin, I don't know that there's another distiller that you and I have had as many conversations about as far as quality of product and tasting things back and forth, other than maybe Leopold is probably up there as well. But
yeah,
I appreciate that. That's a stiff a great company, and because Todd does great work.
Yeah, I think we killed one of these one day at your house.
We did.
But and that was an event.
Yeah, it was.
But all right. Any final thoughts on the Rise or the family recipe or anything at all, Alan?
Not in particular. Other than it's great stuff, and I hope that one day that rye makes it back out there for sure. It absolutely should. It's warranted. Rye's got a lot of potential for growth. See, I sound like I'm trying to talk the company into make sure this happens. But there's room for this rye out there. It's not been pushed and exploited to the extent that it could be, and it is worthwhile to do. So,
right.
Yeah.
And that this is something that we never made it into 53-gallon barrels.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the experimental casks did make it into 53s. I have some chocolate malt and caramel malt. I have a wheated recipe that we did in 53-gallon barrels. So, but the Rye we just kept in the quarter casks.
That weeded, by the way, wasn't that was an ancestral recipe, was it not?
Right. That was Mike Dant from his notebook had it, and he had several different mash bills, and then he had that one circled, and it had a date. It says as of, a date on it. So
yeah. I remember you and I talking about that, and we were speculating on how that would have come about, and they were like we were in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes if you're a distiller, you get bored, you just write a mash bill just for watching the still. You're not doing anything else necessarily. Write up a mash bill, and okay, yeah, here's the beer math. Let's do it. So
I would have liked to met Mike Dant as well. He was the last of our family to own Yellowstone, and he was big with the ponies. He had race horses, and Bill Samuels told me, he said everybody had problems getting their Yellowstone back in the day because Mike Dant would work until 11 o'clock and then he'd leave for Churchill Downs. And he said, what was done was, what he got done.
That's what it was. Yep.
And then I just heard a story that a cousin posted on Facebook today, and it was about Mike Dant. And he said, yeah, my dad went to fetch Mike from a bar in Bardstown, and he got him back, and he was lecturing him on the way home. Says, you don't have to drink all the bourbon in Kentucky. And he said about that time they passed a warehouse being built at night, and they had lights up, and they were building in the middle of the night. He said, yeah, but I got them working 24 hours a day.
Yep. That seems like an appropriate distiller thing to say. Or the retort would be, no, I just have to drink mine. It's fine.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We're about at the hour and a half mark here, so we don't want to keep you for too long.
I appreciate it.
But this has been a real treat because, not to overstate it, but these things have they've been the topic of conversation with Alan and myself and Mike and Drew and others that we know, Christy, and it's been a really fun little part of our friend group, and anybody out there that has tried these, they know. And there are a few barrels left. We'll see what happens with those and when those get released, but just get in line. Okay.
Yeah.
Back here, get in line.
The conversation goes like this, Kevin. Alan, how'd you get fired from Spirits of French Lick? I told people on a podcast that if they brought me a bottle of the malted rye, I'd give them a free tour. And I wasn't authorized to do that. I really just said that to see if anybody would try.
Whatever it takes.
Right.
And okay, wait, here's Mike chimes in. You have to make more of these or we'll lose our friends. Yeah. Well, we need more friends. We can't afford to lose the ones we've got. But Steve, where can people find you or the distillery on social media?
Limestonebranch.com, social media, Facebook, Instagram. I'm on Facebook. And I have an Instagram account I don't use, and Twitter account I don't use. So
yeah,
I'm kind of old school and try to stay off of all that stuff. But
that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
But
if I could, I'd throw my phone in the lake. But
yeah,
they won't let me do that.
Yeah.
So.
Alan, how about you?
spiritsofFrenchlick.com, thealchemistcabinet.com, the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute on YouTube, Distillers Talk on Spotify, and if you have Ghosts, you have everything wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay. Hope everybody was taking notes on that. So as for me, Bourbon Turntable is the show that I host with Drew Crawley. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Facebook group. And of course, the shows are all on YouTube and in video format, and they're on your favorite podcast platform as well if you just want to listen. So once again, Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And you know,
real
anytime,
pleasure, real
I
treat.
love hanging out with you guys.
All
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Well, next time we
Always
need
glad
to
have you.
we need to plan a trip down to the distillery, Alan, and in the daylight, you know, where
Need to get Steve over to the farm sometimes. What we need to do.
oh, that's
Yes.
a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I like
Yep.
that. All right. Thanks everybody that joined in and participated in the chat. This video will be available to watch on YouTube, and we'll share it out as well on Facebook, so everybody can find it if you happen to miss it. So tell your friends. So once again, on behalf of Steve, Alan, and myself, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you on July 6th with our special guest, Chris Koenig. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.